Boy, was that a frustrating loss to watch tonight. Guys, welcome back to Mets Central. This is Mets Fan Reaction Game 84, where the Washington Nationals defeat the New York Mets by a score of 7-5. And in a game where the Mets were up 5-0, and it looked like they were going to take the first three games of this four-game series against the Nationals. In typical Mets fashion, the bullpen comes out and blows it. And there's one guy we really need to focus on tonight, and that's Jake Diekman. So, David Stearns, if you're listening, probably not, but if you are, please DFA Jake. Please DFA Jake Diekman tonight because he can't be in this bullpen anymore. I'm sorry. Every time he is put into a situation that be high leverage, low leverage, middle leverage, whatever kind of fucking leverage you want to fucking put out there, he just can't get the job done. I'm sorry. I was I was happy that we signed him in free agency because I thought, okay, nice little lefty bullpen arm. I can get behind this, but he has just been a disaster this year. A disaster. Either he comes out of the bullpen and he can't throw strikes. His control is all over the place and he's walking the ballpark, or like we've seen tonight, where he's able to get in front of batters on an 0-2 count and he can't put them away, leading him to either not being able to then throw strikes and get him in full counts, walking guys, or just giving up the big base hit. And listen, I know it's tough right now because they don't have a lot of lefties to choose from, and Brooks Raley is out for the year, but Jake Diekman cannot be on this roster anymore. I'm sorry. So, David Stearns, please find some more lefties out there, whether they be through waivers, trades, I don't care. Jake Diekman cannot be on this team anymore. But anyway, guys, let's get into the actual game today. Christian Scott was on the mound tonight for the Mets, and Mitchell Parker, the lefty, was on the mound today for the Washington Nationals. And, top of the first, very quiet inning for the Mets. Francisco Lindor would strike out. Brandon Nimmo strikes out, and JD Martinez would fly out to Luis Garcia. Moving on to the bottom of the first, of course, like I said, Christian Scott on the mound today. He gets CJ Abrams to fly out to center. Lane Thomas would then ground out. He would walk James Wood, and then he would strike out Jesse Winker. Then we move on to the top of the second. Another quick 1-2-3 inning for the Mets. Pete Alonso would strike out. Mark Vientos would strike out, and Luis Torrens would pop out to CJ Abrams at shortstop. Then bottom of the second, a nice quick 1-2-3 inning for Christian Scott. He'd get Cabra Ruiz to line out to Lindor. Luis Garcia would ground out to Mark Vientos at third, and then he'd get Joey Meneses to fly out to Ben Gamel in right. Then top of the third, the Mets would get on the board here as leadoff batter Tyrone Taylor. He'd hit a home run. The home run would have to be checked because the umps wasn't sure if the ball went out of the park in fair territory or foul territory, but they did look at it and it wasn't fair territory, so the Mets went up 1-0. Jose Iglesias would then line out to right field. Ben Gamel would strike out, and Francisco Lindor would ground out to CJ Abrams to end the inning. Bottom of the third, another quick and easy inning for Christian Scott. He'd get Vargas to ground out to Jose Iglesias at second. He'd get Jacob Young to line out to Ben Gamel on right, and he'd get CJ Abrams to ground out to Francisco Lindor at short. So relatively for the Mets, the bats weren't really alive yet. I mean, you did get that one home run from Tyrone Taylor, but for Christian Scott, he was pitching really well. Other than that one walk, just 1-2-3s in the second and third. Fastball was working well today. The slider was working well today as well. Then we move on to the top of the fourth. Brandon Nimmo ground out to Luis Garcia. JD Martinez would then get a double. Pete Alonso would then fly out to James Wood. And then the man we've been talking about for a while now because he's come up and he's hit, Mark Vientos with another home run to center field. Mark Vientos has just been incredible this year since he's come up. I mean, it's incredible. Like I mentioned before, Buck has to answer some serious questions because he sat this kid and it looked like he didn't have anything, but he's gotten his opportunity this year and he's taken it and he hasn't looked back since. But then to end the inning, Luis Torrens would ground out to Vargas. Then moving on to the bottom of the fourth, Lane Thomas would ground out to Iglesias at second. Christian Scott would strike out James Wood. Jesse Winker would then get a double, which at that time, that was the first hit of the game for the Nationals. So Christian Scott had a no-hitter up until that point. And then he'd get Cabra Ruiz to fly out to Jose Iglesias. Then moving on to the top of the fifth, the Mets would get some more runs in this inning. Tyrone Taylor would ground out to Vargas. Jose Iglesias would ground out. So looked like the Mets were going to get anything going this inning. Fortunately, though, Ben Gamel would get a double, and then Francisco Lindor will come up, another guy that we've talked about that's come up clutch, recently. He hit a 2-run home run to put the Mets up 5-0. Then Brandon Nimmo will fly out to end the inning. Now moving on to the bottom of the fifth, we start to see Christian Scott struggling a little bit. He'd walk Luis Garcia to open up the inning. Joey Meneses would then get a single. So first and second, nobody out. Then Idamaro Vargas would get a single, and the Nationals would score a run. Thankfully, Scott would make a big pitch, and he'd get a big double play as Jacob Young would ground out to Mark Vientos at third. It looked like for a second that he might have went for a triple play, but he didn't. He decided to go with the safe play, stepped on third, and threw it over to Pete to complete the double play. And then CJ Abrams would strike out. So even though Scott struggled a little bit that inning, he gave up the 1 run, but like I said, was able to make that big pitch and got out of it. Then moving on to the top of the sixth, Mets couldn't get anything going in this inning. JD Martinez flew out. Pete Alonso would then fly out to CJ Abrams, and Mark Vientos would fly out to Jacob Young in center field. Bottom of the sixth, again, we would see Scott struggle again, but he wasn't able to get through this inning this time. Lane Thomas would fly out to Tyrone Taylor. James would then get a single, followed by another single by Jesse Winker. So first and second with 1 out. Then Christian Scott would make a big pitch. He'd get Kyber Ruiz to pop up. So you figure 2 outs, man on first and second. You figure, Christian Scott's going to bulk down over here. He's going to get out of this inning. Unfortunately, though, Mendy left him in 1 batter too late as Luis Garcia would hit a home run to make it 5-4. Now, I know people are going to say that, he should have, went to Adam Ottavino, in that case, Mendy. But for me, I trust, if I was in Mendy's shoes, I would have had my full trust in Christian Scott, and I would have let him have that batter. Unfortunately, this time it did not work. Listen, it happens. He's a young pitcher. He's going to make mistakes, and he just made a bad pitch right there. But so, like I said, Christian Scott would come out. Adam Ottavino would come out in relief, and he would throw 1 pitch, and he'd get Joey Meneses to fly out. So, and still at this point, even though Scott gave up the home run, it was still 5-4 Mets. But move on to the top of the second. Jacob Barnes comes in as he'd replace Mitchell Parker. He'd get Luis Torrens to line out the short. Tyrone Taylor would pop out to Joey Meneses, and Jose Iglesias would fly out. So nothing going for the Mets in the top of the seventh. Then bottom of the seventh, Vargas would fly out to Tyrone Taylor in center. Jacob Young would then get called out. And then this is the man that, needs to get DFA'd. Jake DIEKMAN would come in for Adam Ottavino. And, of course, in typical Jake DIEKMAN fashion, he would walk CJ Abrams, and then he would give up a big double to Lane Thomas, which would bring in CJ Abrams to score. And then he would get into a long battle with James Woods where, he'd get up 0-2 quickly, couldn't put him away. James Wood would then hit a single, which would then make it 6-5, stole second. Thankfully, though, he was able to get out Jesse Winker, but just it's incredible how bad DIEKMAN is. And like I mentioned earlier at the start of the video, he's got to go. Stearns has to find a way to get rid of him tonight. Then moving on to the top of the eighth, Robert Garcia would come in to replace Jacob Barnes. Francisco Alvarez would then pinch hit for Ben Gamel. He would line out to Lane Thomas. Lindor would then strike out. Brandon Nimmo would then walk. Nats would then make another pitching change as Hunter Harvey came in. Nimmo stole second. Unfortunately, though, with Nimmo scoring position, JD Martinez came up, and he couldn't drive in Nimmo as he was called out looking on strikes on a fastball, which is really frustrating. Then moving on to the bottom of the eighth, Francisco Lindor would come in to play the field. Ty Adcock would come in to replace Jake DIEKMAN. He'd get Kyber Ruiz to fly out. Then Luis Garcia would hit a home run to make it 7-5 Nationals. Joey Meneses would then strike out, and then he'd get Vargas to ground to a double play. Then moving on to the top of the ninth, the Mets need to get a rally here to force the game to at least to get to the bottom of the ninth. Kyle Finnegan, for the 3rd straight game, comes in for the Nationals. He'd get Pete Alonso to fly out. Mark Vientos would ground out, and then Luis Torrens would fly out to right field to end the game. So, like I mentioned before, just overall a really frustrating game. You never want to blow a 5-0 lead, and especially too. I know the Nationals aren't a bad team like we've seen the last couple years, but if you're the Mets, which you're a better team than the Nationals, it's really frustrating to lose these games. And even though Scott did go 4 runs, I mean, relatively he did pitch really well. Just unfortunate that he couldn't get that last out to go a complete full 6 innings. But Yeah, now the Mets fall to 42 and 42. They're still a game and a half back of the wild card. So, yeah, like I said, frustrating. But tomorrow, 4th of July. So I just want to wish everybody a happy 4th of July. Tomorrow, the Mets play the last game of the series against the Nationals, and Jose Quintana's on the mound. The game is actually early tomorrow. It's at 11:05 a.m. So we get some morning baseball that we get to watch. So like I said, frustrating. But everybody have a happy 4th of July tomorrow, and make sure you leave a like, subscribe, and hopefully the Mets can bounce back tomorrow. And hopefully, like I said, Jake DIEKMAN gets DFA'd tonight. Let's go Mets, baby. Have a good night, guys.